Today we are discussing about the slope of the budget line. Now this equation that we can see here, x2 is equal to m upon p2 minus p1 upon p2 into x1. This is the formula for a straight line with the vertical intercept of m upon p2, and slope of this line is minus p1 upon p2. This formula tells us how many units of good 2 the consumer needs to consume in order to just satisfy the budget constraint if she is consuming x1 unit of the good 1. Now if we take a close look at this equation, we can see that it is just the equation of budget line, just a rearranged form of that budget line equation. Now in this, as we have already seen, that the formula is telling us how many units of good 2 the consumer needs to consume in order to just satisfy the budget constraint if she is consuming x1 units of good 1. We can see that we are calculating the value of x2 given these other values p1, p2, x1, income, and p2. So given the quantity of x1, we already have the x1 and we have to find x2 from these quantities. So given the x1, we have to find how many units of x2 the consumer will purchase. The economic interpretation of slope of budget line is that it measures the rate at which the market is willing to substitute good 1 for good 2. As we all know that to consume some extra unit of good 1, consumer have to give up good 2, or to consume some extra units of good 2, she have to give up good 1. So it is the rate at which market is substituting these two goods. Now suppose, for example, that consumer is going to increase consumption of good 1 by this amount delta x1. This triangle is Greek letter delta. This is used to denote change. So delta x1 is some change in quantity of x1. How much will her consumption of good 2 have to change in order to satisfy her budget constraint? Like we already have this budget constraint with some prices and income. So in case the consumer is consuming some more unit of x1, so quantity of x1 is changing, or this will affect the quantity of x2. Now let us use delta x2 to indicate that change, to indicate change in the consumption of good 2. Note that if she satisfy her budget constraint before and after here means like before any change and after the change have occurred. So making the change, she must satisfy this equation, that is the equation of budget line, p1 x1 plus p2 x2 is equal to m, that is income. Now see this fourth bullet and this equation, p1 into x1 plus change in x2 plus p2 into x2 plus change in x2 is equal to m. Now here these delta x1 and delta x2 could either positive or negative, and according to that we will calculate. Like in case if delta x1 is positive, then delta x2 should be negative, because if one consumption is increased, the other have to go down. So p1 into x1 plus change in x1 plus p2 into x2 plus change in x2 is equal to m. Now we'll subtract these two equations, the equation in the third bullet and that in the fourth one. So subtracting the first equation from the second gives us p1 into change in x1 plus p2 into change in x2 is equal to 0. Now this means that the total value of change in the consumption must be 0, because income is same, so total change in consumption must be 0. Now as we know that slope is giving the rate of change, this rate of substitution between good 2 and good 1, so we have to find this change in x2 upon change in x1, the rate at which the good 2 can be substituted for good 1 while still satisfying the budget constraint. So this gives us change in x2 upon change in x1 is equal to minus p1 by p2, and this is the slope of budget line as we have seen earlier. So the negative sign here is because since change in x1 and change in x2 must always be opposite signs, as I have already told. So if you consume more of good 1, you have to consume less of good 2, and vice versa if you continue to satisfy the budget constraint. Now, economists sometimes say that the slope of the budget line measures the opportunity of consuming good 1. In order to consume more of good 1, you have to give up some consumption of good 2. Now, giving up the opportunity to consume good 2 is the true economic cost of more good 1. Basically, opportunity cost is the cost of next best alternative. Here there are only two goods, so if you are increasing the consumption of good 1, the next best alternative was the consumption of good 2. So opportunity cost of consuming more of good 1 is giving up the good 2. So the cost is measured by the slope of the budget line. This opportunity cost is measured by the slope of the budget line.